Two things for our agenda, the two primary things for our agenda. One, to discuss, report, and vote on the Board of Education 2023-2024 operating and capital budgets, which we have talked about at many other meetings. This has now been through the Board of Finance process, so we will go to that. And then the other item, which we'll talk about, the possible revisions to the budget process, which was, folks had the chance to see the meeting on the 25th. This was discussed then. It was also discussed at a prior meeting. So with that, does anyone have anything in particular that they would, and I should also say, Duke did ask if we wanted him or anyone else to be at our meeting tonight, and I politely replied with that, do not think that was necessary, but as they always offer to attend, so I didn't want to mention that. So with respect to the budgets, do folks feel that they want to review any of it in particular, any aspects of it, talk about it, or we just move on to a vote, because I have all these notes that we've taken in the past? Yes?
I just wanted, I went over the cut night, and I mean, they did cut a good bit of stuff.
They
so,
did.
I hope that it comes through in your presentation. They cut secretarial help, they cut a technology, stuff, generally, usually go for the stuff first, but they cut in personnel and they cut in, memberships and consultants. The whole gamut of things that they cut, I think, did reduce the budget. Now, if that was their intent, I'm glad that it worked out that way. But anyway, I just hope it comes through in the report.
Yeah, well, look,
did.
I mean, do you think like those, any sense like were those good cuts, bad cuts?
Well, I think they know from the personnel perspective whether they really need these secretaries.
Yep.
And somebody made a case for, I think, restoring Alex Ridge aid.
Yes.
That was, and so, I think they held on to some of the things, and they held on to the department chairs, but they did make a pretty good list of things they'll think about for next year. But, I guess I saw this as some communication must have happened in which they thought it's too high the way it is, the budget is too high the way it is, and they did, go through this in a thoughtful manner and came up with some modifications that I hope everybody can live with.
Yes, Peter.
So we started with 5% increase, right, and then we cut $1.5 million. Board of Education cut $1.5 million, right? We charge these things, right, Clara?
Around there.
So I guess, for 3.5% increase, we're getting new teachers contract, right? We're getting new mental director, we're getting security. But we're also getting, this $1.5 million cut is, Dr. Adler said it's meaningful, right? Secretarial help is, these people do a lot of work. So I guess one thing in our report is, some kind of follow-up maybe mid-next year to see, whether there are any deficiencies in the working of the school system, because we may be short-sighted. Now, I know the board mentioned that if there are, they'll come back and they'll add people, but it was reasonably meaningful.
Yeah, I agree with Peter. I think there needs to be a review to see if some of these, I don't want to call them clerical, but support personnel, especially like that science secretary and stuff like that, whether that is really causing a problem to the teachers using some of their time not teaching.
And I think, just to continue on that science thing, sometimes I think there is a definition that people have of secretary.
Sure.
They take shorthand and type things in the computer and edit stuff. But I think that the way they describe that job, I would say it's not a traditional secretarial job, because they've described what her responsibilities were in terms of having jobs or assignments within the labs and things like that. So I hope that they will take a look at whether or not that's a good cut.
And there were others, right? There's the organization of
Yes.
the IT department, right? That there's some
Yeah.
position added, position subtracted. There's the building, extra building substitute. That's what happened, right?
Yeah.
So just some kind of follow-up understanding that,
I think those are all good points. I guess one, maybe two points that I would make, just having been involved in this process, like some of you for many years, like, if you look at how it went this year, and you compare that to in some past years, the ad cut night was pretty smooth. It was not like what I think it was last year, where it was, very difficult for some and comfort, and difficult as a process, where you had board members who were trying to drive to a budgetary number, didn't necessarily have good data on what the ramifications of that cut would be, and, so that was just kind of a mess. And if you look at this committee, in past years, this committee has had like quite a lot of debate on some of the things that were in the budget. And this year, I would say, was pretty smooth. Like, maybe the things that we cared about were addressed by Board of Ed members along the way, such that, it's kind of coming through for a pretty clean approval process. And same for Board of Finance, last year. So I guess for whatever the result was of the sausage making that went on over the last couple of months, like, it seemed to have sort of passed muster with the different town bodies, which I would just kind of consider that as like probably a good thing. And I don't have any doubt that Dr. Adley or the administration will come back next year saying, we need this, we cut it, it needs to come back. And I think we've seen that as well with things like technology, where this was one plan, and now we want to change that plan, and sort of with the purchasing of the computers, or went from one-to-one to so certainly I think if they made a cut and it turns out people feel it's lacking, we're going to hear about that next year.
Also, they also cut the budget control, remember, and that's like a chunk of money. So hopefully it'll be good relationship between the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed. If they need another section, then it'll be just a matter of asking for it.
Can I ask you, do you know, I guess that's something that probably the first couple of years I was on here, I didn't really quite appreciate what budget control was, but like, why was it even there? Was this just...
Well, it's a stupid name. I mean, but that's one thing. But it began because there was a sort of more animosity between the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance, and the Board of Ed felt that they should get, sort of insurance, that if they need a section, because there was a lot of debate about, should we put in an aid if the numbers go up, and then the parents would, tell you somebody was moving in, and all that, it was a very controversial thing. So they decided on an elementary section would be added with this budget control money, it would be held there. And then it sort of expanded, so then it became, well, we might need a guidance counselor, we might need a high school, and it sort of got to be a little bit of a slush fund.
Yeah,
but, and I think...
use that word, but that's the word I was
anyway.
But Jim Palin has been very open about the fact that the Board of Ed can come back to them.
So hopefully he and whoever succeeds him will feel that way, because the people are taxed on this money.
It feels like that everyone is trusting the professionals to know what they need and ask for it, and then agree to whatever clicks they need.
We certainly put in our time on the Genius Hour, and we can look forward to seeing whether, once it's finally finished a year, whether it's been worth that $16,000.
I think is it possible they're going to have a special meeting just on Genius Hour?
Oh my God.
Oh,
No, I'm
seriously?
kidding.
We will have started it then. We tried.
They are. We'll get to a couple points. That's probably for the second question.
Sorry?
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Sorry, guys. That's my fault. Bye.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. So the Board of Finance adjusted the Board of Education's budget by $100,400.
Yeah.
And they have a little different system, the way they communicate among themselves, and as a person who sort of takes, has a spreadsheet open, and I listen to all three meetings, the Board of Finance, when they discuss these budgets, but I'm still not sure, and I apologize for going to get your help. What is it?
What is the 100,000?
What is it? What did they cut? Right, because they don't have a line item control, right, of the budget. So I just wondered, is it a passage of time, and Mr. Rudel or Dr. Adler said we don't need this anymore because we're getting some reimbursement?
That was the ECR discussion, so what you're talking about?
Was it the ECR, the
Yeah,
100,000?
they revised the ECR number, and so that
We don't
freed
need-
up $100,000.
Okay, that's, okay.
I don't know if
So I
it's
missed that.
necessarily a cut or just an adjustment.
It was in, okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Anything else on the operating budget? I think we'll vote on these separately.
Yeah.
So with that, is there a motion to recommend the approval of the 2023-2024 operating budget? Pam?
Second.
Clara. Okay. All in favor, please raise your hands, and if you're on, okay, well,
So that's unanimous?
that is
Say
unanimous. Yes.
And there's May.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Oh, Meg's here?
8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Thank you. 13. Unanimous 13. Okay, and then moving to the capital budget, I think the only thing that was maybe a little bit of a, for me, surprise here was just that we were looking at that high school auditorium
Right.
build out, which had not been presented earlier. My own view was they gave a pretty good explanation as to like why we didn't sort of see it earlier, which was new head of that group, sort of causing them to kind of do the audit. Certainly, but other than that, I think the capital items were pretty, I don't want to say de minimis, but maybe what you'd expect when we're spending all this other money on
the elementary school.
elementary schools. So, does anyone else have comments on the capital items? No? Okay. So,
I did find it interesting that there was a person at the Board of Finance who said, let's use the surplus from the budget to actually dribble it in, but do it immediately. So even Board of Finance is not, was not unanimous of sort of supporting the, splitting it. But we're splitting it, right? We're splitting the projects in a couple stages, right?
Yeah.
Didn't they buy another van or 2 more vans, like suburban type vans? And there's a question about whether they could park them in the place where they have parked the others, because there's sort of a zoning thing with the neighbors. I just wondered, did they ever find a place to park them? I mean, it's not something you need to put in your report,
I
but
think they did.
Did they
but
find
I'm
it?
not 100% sure.
Okay, so with that, is there a motion to approve the 2023-2024 capital budget for?
Jan made a motion. Second, Janet.
All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, that is also unanimous with 13, thank you. Okay, next, moving on to possible revisions of the budget process. So, I'd asked Clara to kind of give a little bit of the history, going back to before even my time, as to sort of how we came into the current process. In case anyone didn't catch the meetings, there were a couple of finance committee meetings where they discussed possibly changing the way the budget process was going to work in the future years, and I think what was driving this was sort of the feeling that the administration was spending a lot of time responding to questions that were asked by not just us, by by many folks during the process. The way those questions were formed, because different groups were kind of putting in their own lists of questions. The fact that some questions were would subsequently be addressed. The fact that the Board of Ed itself was not even it was not the Board of Ed's budget, it was the superintendent's budget. And so there was an effort as to, could they maybe move some things around for that process to run a little bit more smoothly. That also included like when they would issue books, whether we would do like the Capitol tour in the fall. And so this was again discussed at the full Board of Ed meeting on Tuesday. I printed out the memo that they had with what I guess they are proposing. So this is not necessarily actionable. Some one or two folks did question whether we should be kind of discussing this at our meeting at this point, because it's not necessarily ripe, but some of you had specifically said you did want to address it, and certainly if we want our comments to be heard, this is the time to make them, because people will watch this meeting, and so they'll know how you guys were all thinking. So with that said, Clara, could I
Sure.
ask you to reach back into your memory and
Yes.
remind us how we got to
And maybe
the
John
current
can
process.
help too. You know, I
go back
was,
before you, Clara.
yeah, I know. I was thinking that it would be a good idea to revisit this a little bit, because before there was a Super Saturday, the budget was discussed for a month, 2 nights a week for a month. And it was not, you know, there was no Super Saturday. But what came with that was, at the end of each agenda item, the public could ask questions. So there was no public comment formally like we have now. But what happened is, the people in the audience then could ask questions, including the RTM Education and F&B and the Board of Finance. And there was a little more of a dialogue, because the Board of Ed could answer the questions. And this whole thing of giving a packet of questions and getting a packet back, it's unproductive for everyone. What we really should have, I think, this is my opinion, is a dialogue in which, for example, if somebody says, how many kids are in the Genius program, you don't need a packet of information. All you need to do is say it's open to everybody. That's it. So I think it would be better if we return to that a little bit, and if we had definitely a little more of a dialogue, so that, you know, if a question has been answered in a previous meeting, they could tell us that. You know, there's various ways that we should have an influence, because I think that the RTM Education Committee, you know, we're connected to the community in a way that the Board of Ed is a little bit isolated from. And I think it's important to tell the Board of Ed what's the conversation in the community about. I mean, I remember once Darien didn't have reading specialists, as surprising as that is, and this conversation started that in the RTM, and it were, you know, the foreign language, and these things happen in the community, and that's something that I think the Board of Ed should be connecting with us on, you know, these particular things that are coming up. I noticed that Jack Davis referenced the idea that, I think I talked to the town council once about what our role was, and Jack Davis did reference the idea that, you know, we don't have line item control, but we can say no. You know, if the questions are too much trouble, and I looked at these questions, and I don't see anything wrong with them. I mean, I think that most of
The
them...
questions that we
The
asked.
questions that we asked, yeah, I went
Yeah.
back and looked, and, you know, I think some of them were done to promote a dialogue,
Yeah.
not always because I don't know the answer. Sometimes I ask questions because I think the Board of Ed should have asked them.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and so anyway, that's
Well,
my spiel, but...
I think I think maybe there was, and I don't know that this came from here, but I think there were some people that were quite critical of the Board of Ed. And it may have been that some members of the Board of Ed took that criticism a little bit personally, because it was kind of directed at them. And this becomes this isn't even our budget yet. You know, we're being challenged
Right.
for X, Y, or Z, and it's being presented to us for discussion. So I think, I don't know, I may be reading sort of something into part of the reason for the change, but I think like some of the challenges that were made, or the accusations that were leveled at Board of Ed members on the budget may have, you know, that may have been part of it. And then I think, you know, just to your point on dialogue, because I agree, I thought the dialogue was the best part of our process when I was involved in it pre-COVID. But the dialogue is harder when you're on Zoom. So that
Yes.
all went away in COVID. And I think, I don't want to say the questions got a little bit, you know, again, if you ask 5 different groups, like CDSP and whatever else, to sort of generate their questions, it's like me asking you guys generate the questions. There has to be some editing, whether it's me or Ann or somebody, otherwise you'd have maybe 10 people asking the same question. And so I think that's part of the reason why I ended up with so many questions, because they just said, give me your questions. Nobody was actually editing these. Yes, Barbara. Oh, thank you. Yes, Teresa.
Hey, so I've been doing this a long time too. I actually like Super Saturday. I hate the idea. I hated the meetings too, because then they would last long. I love Saturday. It's over and done with. But I will say I agree. When we used to do it pre-COVID in person, and it wasn't the chair of a committee asking all the questions that a committee had, but we could all go up to the podium, regardless of what committee we were on or whatever, and just ask the question ourselves. And I would say there was probably a lot less repetition of questions that way than we're getting now when chairs of different committees are gathering all the questions together, because a lot of us are coming up with the same questions when we look at stuff. So I think John may have mentioned in the finance committee meeting that about doing it, like, I think he said that if he were chair, he would probably do it differently. And John, I think you're on here, so correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misinterpreting what you said, that you seem to think that we should go back to the way it was pre-COVID, which I think we should as well, where if I'm sitting in that room and I have a question, I should be able to just go up there and ask it and not have to go through, the chair of the committee. And I actually think you might see less repetition. I think one of the criticisms the board has been giving to some people or committees is that I think there are some people who are using the budget meetings to ask questions that are not related to the budget. I think that is the criticism, and I actually think it is a fair criticism, because sometimes I'll sit there and be like, oh my gosh, that was discussed however many months ago at a meeting, and it doesn't pertain to this budget, but I guess, people tend to use that opportunity to ask the question. So I actually kind of liked some of the ideas that were coming out of those finance committee meetings, because they seemed more pre-COVID-y, which kind of worked well.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that is a problem with everybody writing out questions and sending them in is if you know that your committee is going to send things in, there's almost a little peer pressure for you to sit down and write some questions for me to turn into you, or to turn into Jack Davis if you're on F&B. I mean, you have to have, and I think that's a bit of a problem. Because I don't know what question you're going to ask, so I'm going to write the same thing, not knowing that you said it, and so are 5 other people. But we only need one person to express that thought.
Yeah.
But if multiple people ask a question about something, or say they don't like something and they do like something, there's a message there too. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a nuisance to read them,
Yeah.
but.
Right, and that's important too.
Yeah, I think that if you're doing it in person, that's one thing, but if I know that I have to sit down, not me necessarily, but I think you feel a certain pressure to write questions that you might not think are that critical, but you have, this is your job. Your job is to write questions.
I agree with you about the peer pressure.
To me, right, this year's process, and every process I've been involved, is like my 3rd or 4th years, the board is very responsive and available, right? The superintendent, and Mr. Rudel, they are all available,
We
right?
offer to come to every one of our meetings.
They were offered to come to every one of our meetings, right? And our job, right, is to see whether there's an efficient spend of taxpayers' dollars, right, to achieve the best educational goals. And we can differ on what the best educational goals are. It could be even different from what the Board of Education thinks, or administration, right? That's our view as taxpayers. We ultimately pay for this, or represent the body that pays for this, right? So what they're trying to do, and I'm a big fan of what Mr. Seen is trying to do, is to say, listen, there's 240 questions, right? Let's do it a little differently, right? And if you look at their proposal, it's actually even better for us if you think about it. We get the books before Christmas or before holidays, so we have more time to.
No, we're not gonna.
No.
Tom. Sorry. If you look at the budget, right, it's published publicly on December 21.
Yeah, so we get
So
access to it.
we get access to it. We get information,
It's not
right?
going to happen between the 21st and 25th.
No, 25th, right, but normally we get them day before Super Saturday, and then we're trying to scramble, so we have 2 more weeks to figure it out, right? That's number one, right? Then we submit our questions, right, if you look at it by January 12th. We attend Super Saturday, we can ask questions as individuals, but by January 12th, so we have 3 weeks to think about the questions as a committee. And then, before the add and cut day, we have actually face-to-face with the administration.
Which I think that's the most
And that's the most valuable, right? But they're trying to streamline the time that they spend on these things. So I think we have exactly, we have the access again, and we can have more time to think about it. And honestly, I mean, always the first meetings, I like to listen to what other people are asking, because people have great ideas, right? Now, what's tricky here in this whole process, and we will try it this way, or the Board of Education, obviously, they want to do it, is that they're gonna filter, the questions go to the Board of Education, they're gonna filter what they consider is budget related. And that's what I think is a thin line. On one part, I understand with Teresa saying, hey, listen, it's gotta be, some people fish, they don't do their homework, but there's also new people in the committee, right, who may not live with it, and they may have fair questions about our goals, right?
But I think, the fact is, public comment is still there, right? So if you ask a question,
Right.
and they say, well, we're not gonna address that because it's not related to the budget, you can still make it in public comment. And what I would,
Correct.
and we've seen this in meetings before, where people make public comments, or even in these initial presentations where people come up and can address things, and sometimes like, well, we're not gonna get in, on public comment, they don't wanna get into engaging
Yes.
with, right, they wanna listen to the comment, but it's really helpful when somebody knows the answer to just say, yeah, the answer is 23.
Right.
It's not that we're engaging with you, but you asked the question and the answer is 23. So I would hope that they continue to do that,
Yes.
because that would make the whole process.
Right, and budget is really outcome of a policy, right? So it is a thin line, but, there are all smart people who can, and they can point us to say, hey, listen, Peter, we already discussed this half a year ago, as Teresa said.
Yeah.
Just go back to that meeting and you
Yeah.
can learn about it, right? So I'm a fan of this proposal, and I like the timeline as it's set. I know it's draft, but it works for me.
I think Cassie has.
Oh, sorry, I'm not looking at this.
Oh, yeah, no, it's fine, I'll be
Sorry.
super quick. I can be super quick. So my statement is simply that I feel like they hit on our 2 points, which was earlier access to the information, which we're being given, and number 2, earlier access to conversations and a dialogue. So I was excited to see that. And Ed obviously took 3/4 of Super Saturday, and I only had a small amount when you stepped off. I felt that the number of comments that came in from the group was relatively small and not overlapping. And I just felt like the process went much better this year, and I'm sure it will improve next year.
Why is that?
Just having earlier access to the information and earlier access to the conversation. I think that we'll be able to come up with more detailed and have more time to dive in.
No. Liza, did you have something?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, everyone asked a lot of the same questions and had a lot of the same comments I was thinking, so I think this was really productive. But also, when you read through that April 17th memo, and it's a little, I know it's a draft, and I know they're still working on it, but I was a little concerned. It talks about having a meeting in March after the Board of Ed has approved the budget, and then they would be meeting with us to discuss the questions. And I don't know, I'm a little concerned that timing seems off. It feels as though if we have specific budgetary questions, we might want to discuss those before they're having ad cut night, or before they've approved their budget. I'm a little concerned, maybe I'm misunderstanding the point of that or the timing on that, but I would hope that we would be able to give, input for that time. And I agree that the questions should not be duplicative, and they should be based on the budget, and we should streamline the process. I'm totally in favor of that. I just have a small amount of concern that I think, Peter, you mentioned, the Board of Ed is going to be the one determining if the question is appropriate to be answered. So I do feel like I'm a little concerned about sort of censorship, if you will.
Was it the Board of Ed or the administration that was going to determine?
Board of Ed.
But that seems like a complete waste of their time. If they're going to sit in a meeting, 9 of them, and go through, is this question germane? Let's take a vote. Like that can't.
They haven't determined their internal process, how they're going to do it.
Yeah,
There's going to be a subcommittee. But back to Liza, if I can. They said that January 12 we would submit questions, and January 18 we would sit face to face with the folks. And then there's cut night on February 6. So I think it addresses your concern that we wouldn't be early at the table.
Okay, yeah, I think again, I agree with streamlining this. I like the ideas, generally. I'm just a little concerned that, we don't want it to be squeezed out of the process if we're, if we're really adding value, which I think, that really does, so.
If I may. But
Go ahead, Peter.
So there is a second part to this, which, we do have some policy questions, right? As I said, there's a thin line in this, right? I mean, how will the the Board of Education decide when we look at the budget and there's a bus line, goes up by 3%, right? We can ask about what happened and they say new contract, but there's obviously a policy question whether we should have a new route for kids who have a dangerous way to get to school, right? It's a policy question. So, I know that Mrs. McCammon came up with this draft of Board of Education pre-budget topics and timelines. One of it is the Genius Hours, but they want to go through things that they saw during the budget, right? As little as Genius Hours and as big as, multi-year budget projections, and they want to sort of think about it throughout the year, right? So one thing for us, and for me, because I had some of these questions that were deemed not pertinent to this year's budget, is, maybe we can suggest additional points that concern us, right? That the folks at Board of Education, could
Well, I think
review
we
on.
can, when we do our agenda, we're basically, rules assigns us something that's gonna come up at a subsequent meeting, and so we're meeting to do our report on that resolution. But there's nothing that says we can't, Teresa, you're the expert here, but I don't think there's anything that says we can't put Genius Hour on our agenda and talk about it, which could,
there's nothing that says.
yeah, which could involve saying, and I'm making a little bit of fun of Genius Hour, but, we could say, we're gonna talk about Genius Hour, and we'd like someone from the administration
Right.
to, to come.
Correct.
And certainly when we've had some of these more controversial topics in years past, I certainly recall spending quite a bit of time with
Yes.
the prior superintendent. And it's maybe, we haven't had a controversial topic this year that kind of required that attention, but I don't think there's any reason why we can't be looking ahead to their schedule, saying, hey, this is maybe something that we'd like to
Absolutely.
delve
Yeah,
into a little bit.
I would love that, right? Maybe we can think for next time or time after that to say, hey, what else would we want to think about? Again, that sort of furthers our goal. The one question I had for Board of Education, there's some of these items on the list that Mrs. McCammon prepared they want to discuss, is going to be discussed in their off-site summer retreat, as they call it. Is this recorded as well?
Yeah,
I assume it is?
It
It
is.
is, okay, so we will, because it's interesting to see how they think about these. Okay, wonderful.
Or it was last year.
Right. So, anyway, these policy issues, and I think these folks want us to be comfortable. They just want to be efficient with the administration's time, right? So if there's issues that we want to address, there is a way throughout the school year to address them.
I think Meg might have had her hand up.
Right.
Yes, Meg.
Hi. Just sort of further on those same lines, I think, with what you were talking about in terms of adding line items. I know that's outside our purview, but sort of along the same lines, being able to audit or find out how a certain addition from a previous budget year actually worked out would be, I think, very helpful. So, for example, I think 2 years ago, we had all approved the idea of adding assistant vice principals. And last year, one of my questions to the administration was, how effective those positions were and how they helped. And the response back, not surprisingly, was, it's good. And I'm happy to hear that, but that's not really an audit. That doesn't really give us details. And the issue I have is these are not just 1 year approvals, right? Like, this is a position that will continue going forward, and potentially, we'll add new line items accordingly. So, if there is, one of the concerns I had this year was when we're asking questions, what is the end goal of these questions? I'm asking the administration how the performance was of decisions they had made in a prior year. They're not going to say it was a bad decision, right? But if there was a way that we could somehow get some sort of third-party audit, however that would manifest. I think that would help. It would give us some information, and it would also provide some diligence so that going forward, when if they do potentially ask for another role, we have some history to say, well, in the past we found that there was this much more time afforded per student or per teacher, or however the metrics are. And so this was a very valuable line item, and so I think we should use that information in part to, approve it going forward. So for me, that was a challenge, I think, just not being able to ask a question to the right audience to get the information I think that we could have really benefited from to make more informed decisions.
It may be, certainly I've heard people ask this with other programs, but how will you measure success?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that maybe was not asked when they did the assistant principals, but that's, or maybe it was, I don't recall, but obviously that's something that I think to kind of keep top of mind when we are talking about spending money to do hiring these people or consultants or a new program. How will we determine whether it was successful?
Well, we've done that with department heads.
We
That's
have. And
a number of
Yeah.
times.
Yes. Yeah.
And this year coming up, I think we're going to have a lot of conversation evaluating two things. One, the mental health program, and two, the school security officers. And I think that those two items are probably going to take up more time, maybe more time than they did this year, because there's going to be a lot of different views, I think, on those two things going forward. And I'm not saying I have different views, but I think there will be, because I think both of those things are not easily understood.
Well, I don't think they're gonna discuss much about the school security stuff.
Well, you're probably
Why
right.
not?
Not in public.
Not in public.
You're right.
That's always brought up, not in public, but it can still be discussed. Obviously, it wasn't discussed for reasons we know.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to make sure I was clear. I wasn't suggesting we return to, the 2-night-a-week format. I just was,
No,
you
I don't
asked
think
me.
anyone thought.
I got the impression some people thought I meant that. Super Saturday is fine. What I miss is the dialogue.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
I love
Hey,
nights of
Yes.
It's John Feeney.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, just let you guys know that we've decided to move forward with the discussion points that we discussed at Tuesday's Board of Ed meeting. So, when budget season comes around, there'll be some fine tuning, but there were some comments made about, changing things and that sort of thing. And it was a consensus to the board to move forward with what we outlined in the memos that I sent you guys a few times. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So does that mean we don't get an input?
No, I think it's.
This is the input.
I
Okay.
think it's
I can get that.
Can you remind us what those are that
this
you're
memo.
referring to?
What was that memo?
Yeah,
I think it was.
not the
part of
whole
the
thing, but
package
just
A couple of weeks ago.
the way he
It
spoke,
went to-
it was
Just,
like
he sent
several.
That's a
few.
I mean, there's a lot to it.
An
There's like the
example.
board books are gonna come out these days. It's gonna be published on the internet.
Yeah, right, okay,
I mean, I don't know that this is necessarily a precise schedule. They were
yeah.
changing when they do,
With-
right.
And I can resend that, it's in the board packet.
No, I know, no, I got it, yeah.
John, you're talking about the schedule, right? You're talking about the calendar right now, right? That's.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just one other correction, Jill did not create the policy document that was referred to earlier. That was prepared by Dr. Adams.
Dr. Adler, okay, got it, yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, so the calendar, the tour of schools is beginning December, that's earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, I saw it, I just thought
Yeah.
it would be helpful to be reminded of what he had said.
Oh, I see.
How about the size of the books? That has been covered before. I thought I heard something,
This size.
yeah.
There's an effort to kill less trees.
That's
To
what-
kill
there's
what?
been- For the
Fewer
last
trees.
years, it's been an effort for have it be online for years.
It is gonna be
Yes.
online.
To kill fewer trees but
And
having.
you guys will have to presumably, we all will have to affirmatively say, we want a tree. Otherwise, they're gonna assume we want it online.
So you have to actively choose not to get a book. basically.
No, you'll have to actively choose to
To ask
request
for
it.
it.
This
Okay.
is something we should be talking about. I mean, we're just being told.
Well,
You can request it, see,
we
it's your
can talk
choice,
about it,
Jerry.
but it's like,
I just think we should talk about it.
Opt-in is by December 9th, so we have plenty of time to use it.
You know,
but
one,
it's your choice. It's
Yeah,
like,
It's all right, I'm not,
There's no difference for you unless you opt out of it.
okay, I'm not disputing the method, I'm just wanting to bring up the subject of not having the big books. That's all I said. I'm getting into voting for trees and not voting for trees.
no, meaning the big book is there if you want it.
Okay,
I didn't
But
get one this year.
If you don't ask for it, they're gonna assume that you can just, access it off the internet.
You have to go again.
do we need two big books? I mean, that's another thing, because there's this one that's sort of the working book, and then there's the other
I
one
think they're
that.
gonna be, I'm assuming they're gonna try to phase out paper
Altogether.
altogether. Eventually, it's gonna maybe take some time.
Well, I think too, just to bring up the tree thing, I turned my budget book back in. They want us all to bring our budget books back because they really.
Yeah, I do that too.
Yes.
The binders, and they
Yeah.
also use
The
all,
pages, the thingies,
all the
dividers.
right, all the dividers. So I just, for anybody that's listening that has a budget book,
With the back.
take it back.
I think since we have brought this up for years, it's good to hear this. Very good to hear it, I don't understand
And
why.
also, one clarification, will also be much better organized, like the town plan is by RC, so you can click on a link and go to that direct RC instead of having to leaf through hundreds of pages until you get to the, RC 24.
Thank you,
I still like
John.
the paper.
Well, another thing, if they wanted to have a couple paper copies available, could they put them on reserve in the library, or somehow have some, here's 3 copies, anybody wants them to sign it out for a week, or, I suggested that once before, they didn't seem to like it, but,
Maybe they're afraid you're writing them.
well,
Your
I
own
don't think
notes.
there's gonna be a long list a wait list for them if they
I
go
would
to the
agree.
library.
Not think so. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? And Barry, you look like you want to say something? No? Okay.
Look at it.
She's thinking.
Any other business? Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn? Dan? 8:18, thank you, everybody.